Hi guys, today we have an interesting one. This is the newly released Sony A6700, an APS-C camera that packs a lot of value in its little compact body. And we have over here the A7C, the original. I've already compared the A7C II to the A6700, but those two are very different in price. A lot of people have been asking me about the original A7C, this fantastic little beast of a camera, because this can be had for usually about $200 more than the A6700 right now, and maybe even less if you are buying it used. So a lot of people are wondering, hey, should I get a full frame camera that gives me that full frame image, or get the latest and greatest Sony tech in an APS-C body? Well, let's talk about it. So before I get into the advantages of each camera, let's just show some side-by-side footage. I will start with the auto settings. Just if you took them out of the box, press record, what would you get? And then I will go into the settings that I would use for regular color grading. So here we go. Now you can match these two cameras in post pretty easily, but as you can see, the A7C does have that full frame advantage where you can control your depth of field a little easier. So like something like a 51.2 that you could get on the A7C. There's nothing really equivalent in the autofocus realm for the A6700. So if you want that ultimate blurry background, you're going to be able to get it much easier on the A7C. And of course, you saw the 4K 60 and 120 on the A6700. We will talk about that when we talk about the advantages. In fact, let's just talk about the advantages of the A6700 right now. So first I'll put on the screen here that the A6700 has 26 megapixels and the A7C has 24 megapixels. Honestly, that is not that much of a difference, but I figured I would write it on the screen anyway, because technically the A6700 does have 2 more megapixels. But a major difference is the 10-bit 422 that you get on the A6700. That is so much color information, so you want to use S-Log3, go ahead and use that to your heart's content. With the A6700, you'll be able to grade your footage all day, make yourself some fancy movies like The Bourne Identity or other movies starring Matt Damon. I don't know why I always use him as my example, but I guess I like some Matt Damon movies. The A7C only shoots in 8-bit, so if you want to do a lot of color grading and you like using log footage, then it's going to be more difficult on the A7C. Your image will fall apart much faster. You have the 4K 60 with no crop on the A6700. You don't have 4K 60 at all on the A7C. And also, the A6700 has 4K 120 at a 1.58 crop. So, but still, it's 4K 120, and I use it all the time on that camera. So it is a huge benefit to me, especially when I'm doing products, B-roll, things like that. 4K 120 fantastic to have. On the A6700, you have to be in 1080 to go to the 120 frames per second. On the A7C, you have the AI chip in the A6700, which gives you shocking autofocus. I mean, the A7C's autofocus is fantastic, nothing to worry about right there. But with that AI chip, it is just with animals and human beings, just their eye, it just follows them even if they spin around. It will just track people and animals so very well. And when it comes to photos, you have so many more options. You can do trains and planes and automobiles and birds and insects, and it will just get everything. It will latch onto it and never let go. The autofocus is crazy good in both photos and videos on the A6700. Like I said, autofocus is great on the A7C, but it is not to the level of that A6700. And also with that AI chip, you get that auto framing, which you may or may not use. It depends on who you are. But basically, you can put your camera on a tripod and then set it to follow you around the frame, and it punches in a little bit or a lot, depending on how you set up your camera. And then it'll be like you have some friends or some people in your lives, and you're not just by yourself in your basement that you call Handsome Studios. And it will just follow you around. Very cool. It just adds some dynamic movement to your shots. That is not available, of course, on the A7C. You actually have better rolling shutter on the A6700 when it comes to standard modes. Let's take a look at that now. Now the A7C does get much better with its rolling shutter when it is in APS-C crop mode. So if you're using the camera in APS-C crop mode, and I'll talk about that in the advantages of the A7C, then the rolling shutter is basically on par with the A6700. A6700 has that new touchscreen menu that we were all waiting for Sony cameras for so long. You can navigate the entire menu using the touchscreen. You can also use gestures to swipe more menus on, or the quick menu by going up. It's a much better laid out menu. The touchscreen is very effective. You can manipulate things like your shutter speed, your ISO, and your aperture right there from the screen itself by dragging your finger. A much better user experience when it comes to the menu, and also now you have a touch screen. The A7C is very outdated in that regard. As its only function on the touchscreen is to track or focus, you can't touch the menus at all, and it has those old clunky Sony menus. On the A6700, you have that dial on front, where that is just not there on the A7C at all. So having a dial on front when you want to, especially take photos, very useful. And it's on the A7C too now, which is a good upgrade. But the original A7C, it doesn't have it. And while we're at it, the A6700 has one more customizable button, and of course it has that fantastic switch to go from the photos. Am I in focus there? Photos to video to S and Q, whereas you can't do that at all on the A7C. The things aren't separated, and also with the A6700, you can separate your settings from video to photo. You can have them completely separate so that your ISO in your video won't affect your ISO in your photos, and all of the other settings as well, whereas you can't separate them on the A6700, or sorry, on the A7C, so you have to change them as you go. So once you change a setting like white balance in the A7C, then in video, then you have to change it in photo if you switch over to photo as well. You have up to 4K 30 streaming on the A6700. So as long as you are going through USB-C, it does picture profile off. You can't shoot it with like S-Log3 or anything like that. You do picture profile off, but it still works fantastic, and it is very smooth, and I love it a lot. It's my preferred way to stream. I just go straight from the USB-C. And I don't connect an external monitor while I am doing that, because the A6700 does heat up when you are using external monitors especially. So I'll talk about that with the pros of the A7C as well. However, but when I'm just streaming straight from the A6700 without an HDMI monitor connected. I have streamed for over 4 hours, and I do love that a lot. With the A7C, then you can't do that. You can stream, but only to 720p, and that is probably not something you'll want to do. You have much better stabilization on the A6700. That active stabilization is very good, and let's just check that out now. Now, the A7C does record gyroscopic data, so you can run it through the program Catalyst Browse, the free program Catalyst Browse, or GyroFlow, and you can get gimbal-like footage without a gimbal. The A6700, of course, has that as well, but with the A7C, I find the footage is not stable enough with its regular IBIS, so I would use the Catalyst Browse, or I would use a gimbal for the A7C, whereas the A6700, you don't really need a gimbal or run it through Catalyst Browse as long as you are smooth with your movements. I think things come out very, very well with that active stabilization. You are able to add user LUTs with the A6700, which is great when you're using your log footage because you have 10-bit 422. You can just add the user LUT and see exactly on the screen what it's going to look like in post, and I like doing that a lot. It has a new time-lapse mode where the time-lapse is made in camera for you and just spits out a 4K file. And now with the A7C, you can do time-lapse with its interval shoot function or in the S and Q menu, but it doesn't make the file for you in the camera. This is a new mode that is introduced with the Sony A6700. Focus breathing compensation. The A6700 with compatible Sony lenses can eliminate focus breathing altogether, which is very beneficial at times when you have a lens that focus breathes a lot. It can be very distracting. Focus mapping. This is my favorite way to do manual focus these days. It looks a little confusing at first, but focus mapping really helps you nail critical focus when you are pulling focus manually. I find it much better and more reliable than peaking. So if you're going to do a lot of manual focusing, you are going to like that focus mapping. Smaller and cheaper lenses. Now, this is not an absolute. You can get small and cheap lenses for full frame cameras as well, but on the whole, the APS-C lenses are going to be smaller and cheaper. So something like the Sony 15mm f1.4, I mean, optically, that is equivalent to like a 24mm 1.4 G Master. The background won't be quite as blurry down at 1.4, but the optical quality is fantastic, and it is much cheaper. And you can get even cheaper than that. This lens I'm using right now, the Sigma 16mm f1.4, is $350, and that competes mightily with my Sony 24mm G Master. So depending on your lenses, you can still get fantastic quality, but at a much lower cost than investing into full frame cameras and full frame glass. And speaking of price, the A6700 is still cheaper than the A7C. It is $1398. The A7C you can get right now for about $1598 as of this particular date. Check the links below to see what the price is right now. Because it's an older generation camera at this point, then you may see more and more sales on the A7C. So check down there, see what is happening today. So now let's talk about the advantages the A7C has over the A6700. And while it doesn't have many, the ones it does have are very big ones, like the big full frame sensor. That sensor is so fantastic and the image looks so good. And as I said previously, it is easier to control your depth of field. You can often get a more shallow depth of field, a blurrier background, if that is what you are looking for. And with that full frame sensor comes much better low light performance. The A6700 is a good low light camera for an APS-C camera, but the A7C is a good low light camera for a full frame camera. And so the A6700 just cannot compete with the A7C in extreme low light conditions. Let's take a look at that now. the A7C has APS-C crop mode, so you can have basically 2 focal lengths out of your lenses, especially when it comes to video. When it comes to photo, your 24 megapixels, that drops down to somewhere around 10 megapixels. So you may not want to go into APS-C crop mode when it comes to photos, but when it comes to video, you will still get full 4K. There are plenty of megapixels for that, and the image looks absolutely fantastic. And in fact, as I mentioned, the rolling shutter is better in APS-C crop mode. So if you have a 24mm lens on your A7C, you can go into APS-C crop mode and basically get a 36mm field of view in terms of, it'll just punch in on the sensor. I mean, it's still a 24mm 1.4, let's say, if that's the lens you're using, but when it crops in on the sensor, you'll get further reach out of it. It will have the field of view of a 36mm in terms of the framing. No overheating on the A7C. The A7C doesn't overheat in any mode at any time, in my experience, in all of my tests. The A6700 packs in a lot of power into that little body, so you can get situations where it does overheat, especially if you are connected to HDMI monitors. So if you plan to record 3-hour-long podcasts, things like that, a full wedding ceremony, even though you only have 1 card slot on both of these cameras, so recording a full wedding ceremony, I would want to do that to the card and as well to the external monitors, because I wouldn't want to not have redundant recording when you're recording something that you can't possibly lose. However, we are talking about overheating right now. I lost my train of thought for a second there, but with overheating, the A7C, it is just a beast. It will go and go and go. You can connect it to external monitors. It doesn't matter. It won't overheat. The A6700 is definitely something that you may not want to use for very long form content. I haven't had much problem with overheating myself in this environment here in Toronto, but if you're down in Florida and you're doing long takes and you want to shoot something for an hour and a half, the A7C is going to do you better. Now, I can see how this could be a tough call for a lot of people. On one hand, you have the A6700, which I think is the best value that Sony is offering in its lineup currently. And then when you consider the fact that you can get cheaper APS-C lenses on the whole, it makes it such a fantastic value proposition. You get all the latest and greatest Sony tech, great stabilization, 4K 60, 4K 120, AI auto framing, AI autofocus. It is just such a great camera. But the A7C is a full frame workhorse. It never overheats. It works fantastically. And for beginners especially who don't plan to use S-Log3 and don't plan to color grade, having that really great full frame sensor giving you that nice background separation, just, oh, I tell you, I get it. This one is a tough call. Oh, and let's not forget about the low light performance of the A7C. So tell me down below what you think. Which of these 2 cameras would you get? Which of these 2 cameras did you get? If you don't want either of these 2 cameras, name down below what you would get in this price range, and we'll have a nice little discussion about it. Anyway, thanks for watching this. We'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.